it is truly a testament to the psychotic nature of the US government and the slave mentality of its people that immigration in the USA is the way it is. It truly is amazing. It's something to behold. But I thought today we'd talk a little bit about the reality, because a lot of people are like, well, what's it like in Mexico? And I hear people all the time saying, oh, they treat people worse there. Immigration is worse there. And I thought we'd dispel a little of the myths. Now, I'm not an immigration attorney in Mexico at this time. And we have my brother and I, and Nathan is much better at Spanish than I am. And so we've been studying, as I always do, law. I mean, I always study law. Everywhere I go, I read constitutions. We study immigration law and all this stuff. So I thought, hey, let's jump in here and I want to talk to you guys. Good to see you in there. Shout out to all of you. Are there problems in Mexico? Yes. Are there abuses in Mexico? Yes. Do the police kill 1,200 people a year on the side of the road? Absolutely freaking not. That kind of behavior is not tolerated from law enforcement in Mexico. In fact, the way immigration actually works is a great example of that. Okay, now there's been some changes over the years and different scandals and things like that. What's interesting is the punishment. Thank you all. The punishment for quote illegal immigration. Now, there's really no such thing as an illegal human being, but I understand that countries have made up these rules about them, and you don't always want to fight everything, right? The way it is in the USA is psychotic. They arrest people because they don't have papers to be human beings. They lock them in prison. They hold them on $10,000 ransom. They get the family to pay the ransom. They let them out. They set them a trial date like 3 years out. And when they don't show up for that, they get to keep the money and rinse and repeat. It's completely a for-profit scam, from the prison system to the court system to the police officer. All the border narratives about how immigrants are ruining our economy, immigrants are destroying everything, it's total BS. The federal government has zero authority in the Constitution over immigration. The Founding Fathers were clear about that. The Founding Fathers absolutely intended the borders to be open in the sense of travel. It didn't mean we couldn't have sovereign borders or make sure our borders weren't safe. It meant you couldn't molest someone for exercising their right to travel. This is history. This is the law. And I've had a lot of people angry at me lately because they're desperately searching for a reason that what I'm saying is not historically accurate, but it is. And I've studied it deeply. It's not only a question of moral law, but it's a question of natural law and even of our own constitutions and our founding fathers, who were far from perfect, by the way. But even they knew that the idea of punishing someone because they walked into your country to work was not even on the table when they debated the Constitution and in the subsequent First Congress. Okay, a little bit of a history lesson there, but let's talk about today, because we know that the bureaucracy exists, right? It exists in the United States, it exists in Mexico. It used to be you didn't even need a passport to come to Mexico. And the United States, they want to validate their tyranny, their drug war, just like the United States funds the drug war and spends billions of your taxpayer dollars to fund the drug war in Mexico, to validate their fake war on drugs. In the same way, the USA promotes these immigration standards all over the world, because the USA wants to be able to terrorize the world and then say they're the good guys. And to do that, the USA needs you, the people of the USA, to be afraid of everyone who's not like you, everyone who speaks different. They want to divide us into districts. So the agenda of the global elite is not open borders, in the travel sense. Open borders are what natural law demands. Open borders are what human rights demand. Open borders are what the Constitution demands. That's just a curveball they throw to distract people and get them peddling their propaganda. Because if people think that the global elite want open borders, then people are like, oh, I should be for closed borders. In reality, they're using reverse psychology on you. The agenda is to close the borders and make you fear and hate everyone across the imaginary line, so that when they're bombing them and stealing their stuff and et cetera, robbing them, imprisoning them, you say, yeah, they deserve it. That's those brown people that speak different than us. It's all about divide and conquer, and it's working. So what's it really like in Mexico, right? In Mexico, it's not a nation that's worried about immigrants ruining things for them. It's not a nation that's worried about the false narrative of Muslims are going to destroy us all, when in fact, the police in the USA kill about, 80 to 100 times more Americans in the USA than all other terrorist organizations combined. You see, when you get down to the facts, you have to be like, whoa, something's wrong with what we're being peddled. And so you have to step outside that faction, that fear, and look at who the real enemy is. What happens if you come to Mako, right? You come to Mako, and there's a couple different scenarios here, right? Maybe you're in a situation where you have to get out now because they're trying to destroy your life or your family or kill you or falsely imprison you, and you need to get out. Well, interestingly enough, while the USA turns away almost everyone that needs help and then pretends that it's the wonderful Christian, godly, loving neighbor, in reality, the USA only accepts something like 2% of people that apply for asylum. Mako, in contrast, is known around the world for being a place that welcomes people that need a place. I believe the current numbers for Mako accepting asylum applications are at about 60%. Now contrast that to around 2% in the USA, and you're going to start to see the difference in the way that things operate in Mako. So, okay, those are considerations, but most people aren't fleeing their country for their life. I had to get out quickly, and the fact is, though, if you have a passport, which you shouldn't have to have, but remember, you live in a country where to leave the country, it's been set up that you need your papers, where there's actually checkpoints at the border to protect you from leaving. So it's my belief that it's prudent to get that passport, even though the context of the passport is historically bogus. You should not need it to travel, and it shouldn't be relevant for crossing the border. Welcome to what happens when we allow our government to operate in fake law, fake courts, and terrorist enforcers like those in Blue ISIS. Okay, so you're coming across the border. You've got a passport maybe. You come to the border, and all you have to do, if maybe you need a timeout from the USA, is you go and if you want to be completely on the up and up. We're going to cover both aspects. You want to be on the up and up, you drive into the country. It's a very simple matter. There's usually not really even any immigration papers required at the border. Probably they won't even check your ID at the border. They might, like some border areas, check to make sure you're not like smuggling stuff in or something like that. But frankly, even when I brought my whole huge RV in, full of my personal belongings and stuff, they barely even looked at stuff. It wasn't that I was bringing anything wrong in, but it wasn't a big deal. Like, they didn't open all the hatches and search the stuff. They just kind of glanced over it and they're like, okay, whatever, go. They didn't check papers, nothing. I drove into the country. 20 miles inland. Now, this was at the Sonora border, coming out of Arizona into Sonora. Of course, every border area is going to be a little bit different, but the culture is something you're going to experience probably across the board. You drive about 20 miles in, and there's a little building that you won't even really notice there unless you know what you're looking for, called kilometer 21 in this case. The building's not always at kilometer 21. And that's the immigration office, okay? That's where you go if you want to get a visa. For about $25, you can get a 6-month visa. Near as I can tell, there's no weird restrictions. Mexico, from what I can find, is not even connected to the USA's bogus criminal database. There's none of this like, oh, you can't come in because you have a pending traffic ticket, like you hear about Canada. You fill out the form, you show them your passport, you give them a little money, and you get a little registration thing for your car that you have to make a little deposit on depending on the value of your car, and it goes on your credit card, and when you leave, you get the money back. So there's a couple of little financial things that they're using to try and get some money. Now, this will give you a 6-month residency, or up to 6 months. You could have it for a month if you wanted. It just depends on how long you want to stay. That's what typically you would get if you just wanted a vacation in Mako. Now, let's say you didn't come in legally, okay? This is how much more laid back immigration is here. The state of Sonora, for example, doesn't want people to be afraid to come to this country and do tourism. They want that tourism. So within the state of Sonora, you don't even really have to stop and get a visa. If you just want to come in and visit for a few days, there's basically kind of a boundary around the state of Sonora, and they're like, oh yeah, just come in. You don't have to stop. You don't have to get papers. You don't have to do nothing. It really is, it's like you drive through and you go do your thing. So in that case, while technically you're probably supposed to have a passport, the fact is that they are very welcoming. Now let's say you didn't have a passport. Let's say you were in a situation where you didn't want to stay in the USA. Let me just leave it at that. You guys got to make your own decisions, but no one should have to walk into the gas chamber. Mexico is welcoming. Let's say you had some bogus charge for political crimes, right? And you came down here and you're like, I don't even have a passport, but I got to get out because they're trying to put me in prison. We've been seeing this with a lot of activists across the USA. And it's one of the things that prompted me to say, I got to get my family to safety away from the fascism of the USA. It was never about a misdemeanor. That was not the foundation of what was going on here. They were trying to hurt me, all right? Now, I had thought this might be coming for a long time. So it wasn't an issue once I got in. It was getting out of the country for me that was scary, all right? Because it's Berlin, Germany kind of infrastructure when you leave the country. And our border patrol, Blue ISIS, are absolute psychopathic terrorists, okay? These are not lawful people. They're not protecting us. It's bad news. Now, let's say you were in a situation where you had to get out quick. And maybe you cross over into somewhere like Sonora, where you know that there's not any strict requirements, and you just come in and you're out of the border now, right? You're in a little bit of a safety buffer. Now, what are your options then? Let's say you don't have a passport. Well, here's the thing. There's actually a lot of people that have immigrated from the US to Mexico, like retirees and stuff, and they don't even bother to get paperwork, right? They're actually here, quote, illegally. Now, in Mexico, it's not a crime to be an undocumented immigrant. It is. In fact, that changed some years back because one of the leaders in Mexico was pointing the finger at Arizona, saying how ridiculous their border policies were, and Arizona turned around and said, wait, a lot of our border policies are based on how you guys do it. And it was an embarrassment. And hypocrisy in politicians is not tolerated nearly as much. It's not so much this faction divide of I'm with this party and I'm with that party, and everybody in my party is good and everybody in the other party is bad. The hypocrisy in politicians and corruption in politicians makes people very angry because they're a little bit more engaged, I think, with real life, okay? So when this happened, there was quite a bit of outrage. It caused a lot of egg on the face for this politician, and to the point where they actually changed the laws, because unlike the USA, where everybody that says I'm a patriot is like, all immigrants should be abused and thrown out if they don't have the magic paper, in Mexico, the people don't actually support the abuse of immigrants. It's not like there's this culture, or even like half of the culture's one way and half of the culture's the other way, where everybody's like protesting saying we should throw the immigrants out. There's a culture of respect generally in the basis of how the people behave in Mexico and how they think immigrants should be treated. In fact, in the Mexican Constitution, it specifically says that the immigrant and the foreigner has all the same rights, the human rights that are enumerated there as the citizen. Now, of course, voting and things like that are for citizens. And by the way, the Constitution of Mexico is certainly not perfect, but it's very good. Even though that's true about our Constitution, I constantly see people denying it and pretending that the immigrant has no rights and it's okay to abuse them because they're illegal, even though the laws that make them illegal are actually illegal, so the laws are fake, and there's actually no such thing as an illegal immigrant. All right? Where are we? Well, you've come into the country, right? If you've got your 6-month visa, you can just kind of settle down and do your thing. Go get a place, go explore, go see what you think. And if you want to stay there or move on somewhere else, I can tell you that as soon as you leave the clutches of the USA, your eyes are kind of opened, right? Because we've been fed this propaganda of we have to be afraid. We have to be so afraid to leave the USA. Everything we have and all the good stuff is here. And if we leave, it will be horrible and I'll live in squalor. And as soon as you leave, you're like, oh my goodness, there's a whole world out here and it's not perfect, but there's places that have way more freedom than the USA. And one of them is Mexico, just across the border. So I can tell you, leaving was one of the scariest things. Probably the scariest thing I've ever done. Just the act of deciding to leave, especially under my circumstances, being politically persecuted by the illegal courts in Grant County. That was bad enough, leaving most of my things and my business and my studio and my house and all this stuff behind. But just, and the leaving the country, the exit stations, all this stuff. But the weight that was off my shoulders, the moment I crossed that line, it was different. Even though there was immigration people kind of monitoring the border, they were like, "Oh, how's it going, amigo?" They were super friendly. It was none of this, like, "What are you doing here?" It truly was. It truly was night and day. And that was a remarkable experience. Now you're here and you got your 6 months, that's good, but what if you don't? Well, there are things you can look into, like if you truly are being persecuted, Mexico doesn't extradite for political crimes. Now, if you're facing a bogus charge on something like a violent crime or severe drug charges or something like that, and you think that the government is going to want to extradite you for those bogus charges, you want to do your homework, you want to figure out where you're at and whether or not maybe you should even go further south to a non-extradition country. Because bear in mind, most of the world knows that the USA are terrorist bullies, okay? It's not like all the other countries just want to work with the USA because they're so nice. It's not an accident that the USA snubs Mexico and they don't even share like criminal information, okay? So the NICS database is what I'm talking about. And so if you come down here, it's not like a cop calls up someone in Mexico and they're like, "Oh, a guy ran away down there, like pick him up and send him back." No, cops aren't like that down here. Thanks, Money Mac. Cops aren't like that down here. In fact, a cop, that doesn't mean they never will, but under the immigration law, the police aren't even allowed to ask you for immigration status. If you're like involved in a crime and they suspect you're not documented, they actually have to call immigration enforcement, okay? And enforcement's not actually the right word. It's more like immigration administration, because Mexico does not have a wall, contrary to what the propaganda says. There's no equivalent of ICE. And there's no border patrol in Mexico, okay? Because they don't have this mindset of like, "Oh, people crossing the border are gonna terrorize us." That's US propaganda given you by the people running your government who are actually the terrorists, and they want you to look away from what they're doing and blame it on some poor guy coming across trying to get a job, all right? So you're not gonna have that same experience. Does Mexico deport people? Yes. It's known and somewhat of an element of shame among the Mexican people, and it's kind of scandalous that the people coming up from the further southern countries, like Guatemala, Nicaragua, Honduras, it's known that they get taken advantage of more and picked on. And sometimes deported. It's nothing like the US. In fact, I've talked to a man who's been deported from both Mexico and the United States, and he was like, it was no comparison. They treat you with respect in Mexico. In the United States, they had chains on me, and I was like a criminal. And he's like, "Why would they do that?" It actually hurt to listen to him because you could see the pain in the way that he was treated when he had done nothing wrong. He had worked in the United States for like 15 years, and they deported him and his whole family. And so it's just this huge, it's hard to describe the contrast. Does it mean that immigrants coming from the southern borders aren't ever getting abused or deported? No, it doesn't, and it shouldn't be that way. And there's people in Mexico that are speaking out against that. But it's not like you have this sharp split down the party line where half the country wants immigrants abused and half the country wants socialism. And the half that wants immigrants abused is really socialist fascist too. They just want it only for them and not for the immigrant. I mean, that's how hypocritical we've become in the United States. These so-called patriots that prattle about the Constitution are really fascist socialists that want the social programs only for them. Now, Mexico has social programs too, and in a lot of ways they're probably better than the US. I don't believe in socialism, right? I don't think socialism is a solution. But that's another topic. I'm not here to get into the politics of Mexico. I'm just here to talk about the differences and what you're going to experience from what I've seen and read. I've actually never heard of a gringo being deported. The reality is deportation is pretty optional. It's not like we have all these hard I think I popped off. It looks like I'm back, so let me know if you're seeing me. So let's say you were in here, right? You were trying to flee persecution and you were in Mexico and you didn't have any papers and you got stopped and a cop called and said, "Well, where's your papers," right? Or you got, somebody asked you. Now, technically, most officials, even like a military checkpoint, is not supposed to be demanding papers from you. They're supposed to be calling immigration. Now, that's the letter of the law. I'm not going to say that that's always how it's going to work, but you have to remember a key difference, and this is why it's one of the reasons it's so different here, is I don't approve of any checkpoints. I don't approve of people being abused. I don't approve of militarized police, but the culture is so different here. So even when you deal with a police officer or a checkpoint and they're questioning you, the level of hostility and intensity and we're going to hurt you, that is so much different than it is in the USA. When you deal with a cop here, you don't feel like they're hopped up on drugs and they're about to shoot you in the face because your nose is too big, all right? The fact is, it's a major scandal in Mexico if the cops shoot someone, much less on a camera. These incidents we see in the USA every day of cops just executing people on camera, if that happened in Mexico, honestly, I've never even seen a video like that in Mexico. If that happened in Mexico, the cop would be charged with murder within days, probably within 24 hours of it coming out that it happened, okay? So you gotta throw out your confirmation bias. I used to think this way too, well, the USA is as good as it gets, right? Not even close. Is Mexico close to perfect? Not even close. Is it have way more freedom than the USA? Absolutely freaking yes. Okay, so what's next? You're here. Well, if you're here undocumented, it's a little tougher. You probably, particularly as a gringo, if you get stopped, you don't even necessarily get deported. It's more like a big traffic ticket. So if somebody gave you trouble, honestly, you could probably give them a few thousand pesos and they would just be like, whatever. Is that corrupt? Yeah, but if your life is in danger in your home country, these are things that you got to consider. Hopefully you won't have to deal with that though. But you know what? In the USA, the government system has been refined so that the judges and the courts and the system profits from the bribes. Here, it's a little more every man for himself in that there are some cops that'll try and get a bribe on you. But let's be realistic. Would you rather go to jail or go back to your home country to go to prison if you're being politically persecuted? Or would you rather try and deal with it? I've talked to lots of people that have given cops a bribe. And let's not be all self-righteous and pretend that when you defer a ticket in the USA that it's anything but a bribe. It's just in that case, the cartel has organized it and it goes into their coffers instead of the officers. But let's get past that because I'm not here to encourage you to give bribes or even talk about how that works because I've never had to do that. I haven't had any problems even when I've been pulled over down here. My brother once had a cop try and get a bribe. And he just kind of said, no, let's just go to the police station. And the cop's like, no, let's not do that. Have a good day. And he just left him alone. Know your rights. That makes a lot of difference. If you know the language, that's going to help if you've just come into a country as a visitor or as a refugee. Now, talking about not being a visitor, if you're in as a refugee from somewhere, from what I've studied and seen, you can apply for asylum, and Mexico has a good rate for accepting those. And if you were to do that, then you'd be legitimate, right? If not, if that didn't work out, right, that's probably what you would do if you were trying to get out of the USA and you had nothing, is get across the border, get a place to stay, and then go apply for asylum, okay, if you had nothing else you could do. Now, if they rejected that, well, what does that mean? Does that mean they're going to immediately throw you out? It's not like that here. That could happen. More realistically, they would probably work with you or let you go to one of the other Latin American countries. There's never a guarantee when you're talking about government, okay? Now, let's get away from that a little bit, though, because the reality is most people are not refugees that are actively being pursued by their government. It's going to get more and more that way from the USA because it is a fascist state, but it's not for everybody. It's not that bad yet. I just wanted to address those somewhat darker issues because there's going to be people that really are faced with that, and I want to encourage you guys, don't just walk into a gas chamber. Does Mexico extradite to the United States? Yes, for serious crimes, but it's not like the cops can just call them up. They actually need a lot of information on you. It has to go through the Department of State. I mean, it's a big deal. It's not like your local sheriff can call up the cops in Mexico and be like, hey, I want this guy. And they're like, okay, cool. In fact, Dog the Bounty Hunter once came down here and took someone and tried to take someone as a bounty from the United States. And he was put in jail for kidnapping. And they're like, you can't just take people. That's kidnapping. And it wasn't tolerated. Okay? So the bounty hunter thing, short of like the CIA wanting to come and get you or take you out, which I've certainly thought about that, but in general, that's not going to be the case. Okay? Let's talk about the more normal situation though. You're down and you're just ready to get out of the US. Maybe you're retiring. Maybe you've sold a business. Okay? You got your 6 month. There are people down here. There are people down here that live here permanently, and they just get the 6 month visitor visa. And the reason is the 6 month visitor visa is really intended that you're here for 6 months and you go home and maybe you come back later. In reality, they're pretty easygoing about it. So there's actually people down here that are retired, and they come and they pay the $25 and they get a 6 month visa. And at the end of 6 months, they go out and they walk across the border and they turn around and they get another 6 month visa. It's called a visa run, and it's very common among people that retire and visit Mexico a lot. So if all these other options failed, to get a visa, technically, you're supposed to have a passport. I don't know if you can get one or not. It probably depends on who you're talking to, because again, the immigration, the rules, and the cops, everything's so much less rigid. It's not that it's always about a bribe. Sometimes you just have a guy and he's like, oh, whatever, it's no big deal. Like, it's so much more laid back. I've never actually been asked by an official for my ID since I was inland in the country. Like, I've never, even when I've been stopped by police and pulled over, they didn't even ask me for my ID. So I'm just trying to convey how much more, yes, there's bureaucracy and rules, but it's so much more laid back because the people are a lot more practical, right? If they're like, it's not a crime to look at a cop and say no. Like, why would I do that? I've even seen guys just up and run from the cops, and people are kind of standing around, and it was like, oh, that's no big deal, right? And the cops are all tearing after him like the Keystone Cops, and it's just like, whatever. In fact, I think I have a video of that. Maybe we'll do that. Okay. I know this is getting long, but this video is for those of you that want to know kind of what's going on. So bottom line is that 6 month visitor visa is pretty versatile. And it's certainly a good way for you to come and visit. I would encourage you guys, right? Maybe you're not leaving, maybe you never want to leave, maybe you're not ready. At least get out of the USA so you can get out of those clutches. As soon as you step out of that dark spirit that consumes the USA, you kind of look around and you're like, wait a minute, there's a whole world out there. And here I've been taught all my life that the USA is the only decent place and everywhere else is horrible. You need to get outside of that so you can at least have your eyes open to how fake all the border restrictions and immigrant abuses are in the USA, and how fake our laws and our courts are, and how fake our freedom is. The fact is, the people in the USA, they don't even have a concept of what freedom is, most of them. Because most of us, have never had freedom in our lifetime in the USA. Is there pure, perfect freedom in Mexico? No, I'm not sure if there's any country in the world that has that. But there are levels of personal freedom and not being attacked by blue ISIS Nazis all the time. Okay? So you got your visitor, your visa, up to 6 months. Let's talk about becoming a permanent resident or staying permanently. Okay, now you get into, work visas and permits and things like that, if you want to be totally above board about it. In reality, let's say you come in on that visitor visa, okay? In reality, it's pretty laid back, again. It's not like a mindset here of, oh, you don't have documents in order, we're going to report you. That's not how people think here. The idea of reporting your neighbor to the government is not acceptable in this culture. It's not neighborly, and they're a very neighborly culture. If you're not hurting someone, the Mexican ideal is to leave you alone, right? They don't treat us like we treat them. So if you come here and you don't have a work visa, there will be totally places that'll be like, I've talked to people that schools offered them a job, and it's like, well, I don't have a work visa. And they're like, oh, whatever, like, it's not a big deal, okay? Now, I'm not saying you should do that. I'm just, again, making parallels of how much more laid back it is here if you want to be permanent. If you're retiring here, basically the way it works, near as I can tell, is if you want to retire, maybe you're selling your house and your business, etc., right? Money goes a long ways. Pretty much if you have $100,000 in your bank account, you can retire here and get permanent residency. That's the gist of what I'm seeing, okay? Now, if you're not retiring, if you're a younger person, maybe you're working, that sort of thing, you can apply for permanent residency if you want to invest, like start a business here. And again, I think it's around $100,000. You could get like a business visa and essentially get here permanently and open a business, all right? If you're just coming in, right? Maybe you got a little money in your pocket. You're not just going to walk in and be like, give me permanent residency, and they're going to do it, okay? Because it's generally, they hand out permanent residency to people that have more money, that are retired. I'm not saying it should be that way. I don't think I think permanent residency in any country should simply be a matter of walking in and setting up shop. That's the basis of natural law. But in most of the world, unfortunately, it's not that way. It's not as honest and fair to the immigrants as it should be. And there's activists that stand up for that in the States and here in Mexico. But my theory is the time to be an activist for immigration is not when you're at your most vulnerable point. Okay, so for example, if we're coming to Mexico, it's probably not the best time for us to be immigration activists, right? We don't need to get involved in that. We're trying to not be slaves in our own country, right? We're trying to find a better life or whatever it is that we're doing. And if let's say I come here, there is a clause in the Constitution where you're not supposed to be involved in politics if you're not a citizen. Now, really what that's getting at is, you're not supposed to run for office. You're not supposed to be sponsoring political candidates and getting involved in the politics. It doesn't mean you don't have human rights. Those are specifically addressed as well. You can stand up for your human rights. But just like the Mexican coming to the States that doesn't have everything in order for our bogus system is not going to be the best activist for himself. You're not going to be the best activist for yourself when it comes to immigration if you're in Mexico. The person who's already a citizen should be standing up for the rights of the immigrant. And so that's our respective jobs in our home country. That's why the patriot movement has failed so much, and that's why it's pretty much fallen apart, is because they don't actually stand up for people's freedom. They've got arrogance and flag waving and pride and cop worship and government statist worship. The number one people standing up for the Mexican immigrant should be the U.S. patriot. They should be the ones saying, shut down the Border Patrol. It's unconstitutional. It's abusive. It's illegal. People have the right to travel and to come and work in our country. Who do you think you are? But that's not how it works. So now you're down here. Maybe you've got your 6-month visa, right? And you're like, I want to stay here. So what are your options? Well, like I mentioned, the one option is you could do visa runs. A lot of people do that. Even though it's not officially the method, but it's not restricted near as I can tell, and it's very well known that it's done. I mean, it's not a big deal. So you could do that. If you're retiring or starting a business, you might look into the options for permanent residency, which does have a higher threshold, okay? The other option is annual residency. Annual residency is a lower barrier of entry. So basically, I think you kind of have to show an income coming in of, what is it, $1,200-$1,500 a month, something like that. Like, they want to see that you're not going to come in here and just not have a job and not work and leech off the system, okay? So if you had a job offer here, for example, if you have skills, much easier if you were bilingual, you had a good job offer, that would be a way that you could immigrate, maybe even get permanent, but certainly annual residency. All these different outlets that you could do. So the annual residency, after I think it's 4 years, then on the 5th year you can get permanent residency, is basically how it works, okay? And I do want to be clear on these numbers that I'm talking about of how they want you to have money. You're not paying them that much money, right? I mean, I think the fee to get a permanent residency is something like $150 or $200 or something like that is the paperwork fee. You're not giving them $100,000. They're saying for retirees coming here getting permanent residency, they're saying we want you to have that much in the bank. And it's not quite that simple. Like, if you were looking at that aspect and retiring here, you'd want to look at the retirement community and what's typically expected. It's not quite as straightforward as if I have $100,000, they just hand me permanent residency. There's still a process to go through, but in general, there are tons of permanent residents from the States and Canada that are retiring here, and you don't have to have a huge retirement is the thing, because for a lot of people, just selling their extra property or their house or just their savings is enough to retire here. Whether there's an age limit, whether you have to be a certain age to retire here, if that enters into it, I'm not entirely sure because I'm not in a position to be retiring right now. But those are things you want to look into. Do they expect you to be a certain age if you're retiring? The bottom line is what I'm getting at here is there are many, many ways to come to Mexico, either as a short-term visitor, a medium-term visitor, or any of these things. And there's lots of options. Now, if you come here undocumented, all right? If you come here undocumented, and I'm not encouraging you to do that, I'm just saying that if you're in a situation where you're a refugee from the US government, or any government for that matter, there are means, and the means would be something like applying for asylum. And the rules are actually pretty favorable. I mean, if you start digging into the immigration law, like the first paragraph in the immigration is that the family is to be respected, right? The human rights are to be respected. Families are not to be split up. Like all the things that we do to Mexicans when they come to the United States, in their immigration laws, they like mention that that's not okay. So there's actually a lot of checks and balances. Now, are those all followed? Probably not. Bureaucracy is still bureaucracy, but I do actually see the police officers and the community and the government having a lot higher respect for individual liberties and rights, far and away, than the psychotic police we have in the USA that straight up make up the law as they go and do whatever they want, okay? So if you can, just do the paperwork. Just do the paperwork, and if you don't want to have any trouble, go that route. Get your passport and just come down here. It's so easy. The 6-month one, if you just want to like come down here for a while and see where you want to go from here, right? It's a jumping off point. Because once you get out of the USA, it's like a jumping off point for the whole world. So the 6-month one is literally a matter of like rolling in. They're probably going to ask to see your passport if you want the 6-month visa, because you are supposed to have that now. And you give them like $20, you fill out the paperwork, and they're like, here's your visa. Have fun. That's pretty much all it is. It's not a big deal at all. There's not like a waiting period, nothing like that. Okay, all of the permanent residency statuses are going to require a bit more bureaucracy and paperwork, but it is so much easier. You have to understand that in the United States, a Mexican can't even go drive across and visit the United States, right? Even if they have a passport and things are in order. Like the United States doesn't let them, unless they go like to Mexico City and get specially approved and win like this drawing. You know, it's like for a Mexican to go to the USA to visit is kind of like if you are entering a drawing for like a moose tag and you're like one of the lucky ones that got chosen, but if you're not chosen, you don't get the money back, right? That's how bad we treat even the visitors coming to the USA, all right? It's not going to be that way when you're coming down here. Far more laid back. There's not people like just like freaking out, checking your documents. Sonora is a good state, even if you don't, they don't even require that you stop and get like the visas and stuff. They've basically just defied the federal government on that and be like, no, we're not allowing that here because it is not good for our tourism. All right. So these are some things to look into. If you were faced with a situation of needing to seek asylum, do that research, look into it, but you could come into the country, and the fact that you were in the country, quote, illegally, according to the rules of asylum, as I understand them, having looked into the immigration statutes here, is not a reason for them to deny it, right? In fact, if a refugee comes here, they say, I'm gonna go in, I'm gonna apply for asylum, maybe they had nothing, no passport, no nothing. I mean, it's very common. You see refugees right now in Honduras all over the place. And so let's say a refugee came here, and they were not legit, and maybe they stayed here for 3 months, right? And then they probably, let's say they got stopped and they weren't legit. Even then, near as I can tell, there's not a clause And the immigration laws are so much simpler. There's just not a clause. The foundation of the immigration rules here is they're supposed to respect your rights, okay? So if you were a refugee in Mexico for whatever reason, you could go and apply for asylum, and during that application process, they would basically give you a receipt that makes you legit, right? So that you're not gonna get harassed for being here, quote, undocumented or illegal, even if you had been, hadn't come into the country legally. There's also a program where there's an amnesty program that happens, I think it's once every year they do it, and it's not always the same time, but basically people that have been here for a while under the radar that aren't refugees, but they didn't have the qualifications to get permanent residency, or they just didn't, or they were too poor, or whatever. There's actually a legit amnesty program here where a lot of those people will go in, and at that point, they still have to go through an approval process and stuff. There's still more bureaucracy involved, but people will go in and get amnesty and become residents that way. Now, of course, that would be a stressful situation and probably not the best. Nobody likes to run around looking over their shoulder. So what I'm doing here is I'm not suggesting that you flaunt rules and laws. I'm not suggesting that you go and be like an immigration activist in a country that is not your native country. That's the job of the natives. I'm trying to throw these options out there so that if you need to defend your family, if you need to get away from the USA, because I see a lot of people going into prison in the USA, and I'm like, why? Why walk into the gas chamber? This isn't law. There was no due process. There was no justice here. This crime doesn't even have a victim most of the time. Why do we submit? And it's funny because people call me a coward, but you know what, guys? Wisdom is knowing when to get out. Courage is being willing to do it. And that's just the reality of it. And I'm not trying to brag about myself, right? I just did what I thought I should do for my family and myself and my safety. But don't let people convince you that patriotism is sitting in a prison or going down with the ship. Patriotism and love for neighbor is defending people and justice. The USA is a nation founded on people who ran away from their corrupt government, who got away, who left their homeland. And then when that still wasn't enough, it's a nation founded on people who abandoned their home country and said, we're not going to tolerate you anymore, and went to war. Now, I always prefer to avoid war, and the people are so asleep that a revolution in the USA right now would be chaos. We need a revolution of hearts. The people in the States are such sheep that they want to be slaves. Most of the people I see in the US don't even have a concept of what it means to have freedom. And so they run around waving a flag and parading around and saying how great they are, and they just have no concept. Okay? Now, what does it mean to stand up for freedom? It means refusing to comply with tyranny. A phenomenal way, and I want to encourage people, if you got a court and they're just abusing you and railroading you, like, why? Don't put up with that. But you're not going to fix it by saying, I won't put up with it while you're in their courtroom, all right? I had to leave my native country to get out of reach of the psychopaths in my government that want to silence my voice and lock me in a cage, okay? And that was a big choice to make. It wasn't one I made lightly. And there's a great cost to that, and God only knows still what will be the outcome of that and how much it will cost me. But you know what I do know? What I'm confident of, at least, is that it was the right choice. Refusing to bow down and go into a tyrant's court and lick their boots is the right choice. I'm not saying it's the right choice for everybody. Maybe you're dealing with something small and you just want to get out from under it and go on with your life. I get it, okay? But don't ever let someone define your courage by their cowardice. And that's what I've seen a lot of people doing to me, okay? I've seen a lot of people trying to say, oh, you're a coward because you didn't stand up and like walk into the gas chamber. You're a coward because you didn't go into the court and do it their way. I'm like, that doesn't even make any sense. Like, what successful general in history says that courage is doing it the enemy's way? Like, it really is a completely irrational thing. So what we have is a lot of feds, a lot of loyalists, a lot of fake patriots that are trying to uphold the illegal and corrupt system. And I'm not saying what you should do or what you shouldn't do. I'm just saying you don't have to walk into the gas chamber. All right? Thanks, Juan. And you don't have to do it. Now, I'm looking at my options down here and seeing where I should be in all this, and I'm not going to give out any details on that right now because there's literally people that work for the federal government that are known informants that are seeking out where I live here. They're putting out information on me. They're doing everything they can to hurt me. And, so I appreciate your prayers and support for my family on that. But other than that, I just kind of gave you all these different options of coming to Mexico as a visitor, as a long-term visitor, as a temporary resident annually, as a permanent resident, or even as a refugee, okay? And those are some considerations. And yes, guys, I do have a PayPal. It's paypal.me/SEIM. You can also find it on my website at callmegav.com. There's a page over there. And you can also check out the merchandise, the new Blue ISIS merchandise, if you want to spread the message and stand peacefully and united against the blue trees. And we've got all the graphics and the stickers for the Blue ISIS message that's really starting to take off. The short link for that is bit.ly/Blue ISIS 2. All right, so I'll put some of these links in there, but that's not really what this topic was about. But I do appreciate your guys' support and your kind words. So okay. This was long, but I don't think it was that long for the big picture, right? Let me see if Nathan's out here. Hey, are you out here? Hey, come here. I'm doing a live stream on immigration. I think I pretty much covered it. I did want to add, I actually looked today. How many pages is immigration law in Mexico?
Oh, the immigration law is about 42, and then the refugee law is about 20.
Yeah, so basically there's like 60 pages of immigration law in Mexico. And there is the Title 8, I believe it is, in the USA for immigration in the USA is about 1,200 pages. All right, did you hear that? There's about 40 to 60 pages of immigration regulation, I should say. I'm not going to necessarily call it law in Mexico. And in the USA, just the base immigration regulation is about 1,200 pages. That should tell you a lot. All right, so I covered that. Basically, I kind of went over everything with them, Nathan. Nathan reads Spanish way better than I do, so he's kind of been doing the more deep studies, because you can find articles on this on the internet, but usually they're not direct translations of the Spanish documents, which are not available typically in English, okay?
There's very little Mexican law available, direct translation in English. You can find articles.
You should move close up
You
here.
can find articles talking about, overviews of it that are of, well, to be polite, variable value. But there is very little translation of Mexican law available into English, with the exception of the Constitution down here. Constitute Project actually has an excellent translation of that and most other countries' constitutions.
Yeah, so you've got, basically I said you've got the 6-month visa. For somebody that wants to stay longer, a lot of people do visa runs, even though that may not be quite.
It's legal.
It's not. You're not going to get in trouble for it.
It's legal. There's nothing legal about it.
It's just not. It's not really considered the official method, but tons of people do it.
Yeah, but there is absolutely nothing in Mexican law that says you can't renew a visa.
So you can totally do the visa runs. Then we have the annual, which requires some financial stuff.
It either requires financial stuff. Getting a student visa to study here. There's a whole bunch of ways to do it, actually. The most common is financial, and you got to prove you have an income of about $1,000 a month. That's usually the easiest way for most people to get residency.
Right. Student visas are also another consideration, and here's and then you have the permanent. The permanents, I explained to them, is a little harder for somebody just walking here. But if they're retiring, basically I said, if you're retiring or you want to come here and start a business and you got $100,000 in the bank, you could probably just come here.
Yeah, although if you're a retiree, if you're an older folk, and they actually do kind of pick on people who are under 50 trying to get permanent this way.
If you're trying to retire,
if you're trying to get permanent through.
They want you to use another
But if you're
means.
an older person and you have retirement income or rental income or whatever it might be, it's still only about $1,500 a month to get permanent residency. And with permanent residency, you have work rights.
Annual residency.
No, that's permanent. If you're a retiree, you can get permanent for about $500 more. Annual's about $1,000.
Oh, okay.
It doesn't cost that much. That's how much income they want to see that you.
Oh, a month,
have.
you mean? Right. Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes. So, for younger people that were like, say, selling a home or a business, though, if you have about 100,000, you can also look into like maybe a business visa.
You can do a business visa. Not only that, if you sold a home, if you want to do a temporary deal, if you want to get yearly, if you can hang on to that money for 6 months, if you have, I believe this year it's $30,000 in your bank account for the last 6 months, you can get temporary residency because of that. And the way temporary residency in Mexico works, generally speaking, is they check your income once. You can renew temporary for 4 years. After 4 years, you can pay a fee of about $150 and it turns into permanent. After 5 years, you can begin the citizenship process.
Right. And so what we're getting at here is there's a lot of ways, and there's certainly things worth looking up, and you can find immigration lawyers that speak English, right? So if you want to take that route, especially for the retiree process and stuff.
A huge amount of people who want to move to Mexico, for the retirees especially, use Chapala law, and Chapala law is really geared towards the gringos. So, and you can call them up and just ask them. They'll give you info over the phone for free.
Right. And so I talked about, those are the organic processes.
That's ridiculous leaning like that.
Yeah, I talked about, and then I also addressed the refugee aspect, how basically even as a visitor coming into Sonora, are you even technically required to have a passport to visit Sonora? Because you don't actually have to stop at immigration in Sonora. So are you legally even required to have a passport?
They'll stop you if you get to the point where you're supposed to have a passport, and I'm pretty sure all of Sonora is free zone, you don't have to. There'll be a guy that says, I need to see your passport. If you say, I don't have one, he'll either say, well, you can't go any further, or he'll shrug and say, don't worry about it.
But it's not like you're going to go to jail because you're caught without a passport. That's USA crap. That's not how the law works in Mexico. I explained that even if you did have to leave the country as like a refugee and you got caught, illegal immigration is not a crime, but you could be deported. It could be a fine. But then I talked about the refugee status where you could apply for asylum.
Well, you don't have to have refugee status to apply for asylum. If you
no, you would be seeking
Mexico.
refugee status.
One thing, Mexican law doesn't use the term illegal immigrant. They use undocumented.
Right.
Because they say it's not illegal, although it's a little bit of it's an
infraction.
It's a word game because they still issue fines for it.
Put it this way, you know how you see signs in the States and they're like $2,000 fine for littering? That's like the max fine. Well, the max fine for being an undocumented immigrant in Mexico is like $2,000, and it's not a jailable offense. Theoretically, they can make you leave. Have we ever found a case? I explained that sometimes the people from further south get abused more, but the honest truth is they think gringos are kind of exciting a lot of times.
It's not just gringos. I think people from other countries, especially non-Hispanic countries in general.
Right, because they're different. It's exotic, right? But there is a little bit of gringo privilege here. And I'm certainly not saying you should abuse that, or that I'm not even saying it should be that way. We should all treat each other the same. But the fact is, you don't hear about gringos getting deported like, I don't know if ever.
The only times I've heard of that...
I guess we got in a fist fight with the federales.
That probably wouldn't do it. I've heard of a couple cases where somebody that was wanted for a violent crime was in a border city, and the U.S. made a deal to deport them and then arrested them during the deportation instead of doing a formal extradition, which is a little shady, but that's the only cases I've ever heard of a gringo being deported.
I also explained that if somebody was facing bogus charges like political crimes and stuff like that, they would, that it's not just like they can call up the cops and they'll deliver you. I mean, unless something shady is going on, but according to the rules and how it typically works, it's a major deal for like your county sheriff to extradite you. It has to go through.
The county sheriff can't extradite you. The feds have to.
It has to go through. I told him it has to go through the Department of State, I believe.
Department of State, yes. And then so theoretically,
they have to send a whole packet down here. It's a very
and you get a hearing before a Mexican judge.
Yeah, you also get a hearing. It's not like they just grab you and drag you out. I mean, they don't deport you or even extradite you here without some degree of due process. Is what we're finding now. If you if there are situations where somebody might be in a situation where they might want to look at going even further south. I mean, what's one of the countries that really doesn't even extradite to the U.S.?
Nicaragua.
Nicaragua's one. Nicaragua's a poorer country, so if you don't have money, that's going to be a little harder, but at least you're not in a cage, right? Even like Colombia and something like that.
Colombia does some extraditions because of Plan Colombia in the 80s when we put the drug war in Colombia and destabilized it. There was a lot of deals made for extradition. So Colombia and Mexico, as far as extradition, are pretty similar. You have to generally be fairly high profile. Although if you come to Mexico to get away from something in the States, don't settle in a border town. Just don't do it.
That's the easiest way to get extradited. And we want to be very clear here. We're not encouraging anyone to flee from their responsibilities or from their accountability if they've hurt someone or from any real crimes. But we all know firsthand that most of the trials, the charges, and the imprisoned people in the USA now are bogus. Most of the things people are being charged for don't even have a victim. And walking away from a gas chamber is not fleeing justice. It's fleeing persecution. There's nothing morally wrong with that. And in general, it seems that historically and currently Mexico is very welcoming to those kind of people. Doesn't mean it's going to be easy.
Yeah, that's true. Well, you got to understand, I mean, you can look at like the 90s when there was a huge amount of political repression that eventually turned into genocide in Guatemala. Now, Guatemala now is a pretty nice place, but in the 1990s, Guatemala was not a nice place. From 1989 to 1998, I think, Mexico accepted 100,000 Guatemalan political refugees.
Yeah, I mean, it's just huge numbers, and they're known for it.
Yeah, they're kind of famous for it in the world scene.
If you're dealing with stuff, look up Mexico's extradition treaty, because they actually have pretty specific rules about things they will not extradite for, that just aren't on the table. Political crimes, political persecution. There are things. It has to be a pretty major crime for them to extradite, and even then, there's no guarantee that they will extradite, because they review it.
But if you did something terrible to someone, you're likely to get extradited. If you're guilty of a violent crime or there's excellent evidence against you, they'll extradite you. They don't extradite very many people. They also extradite on drug charges, which I think is a fake crime, but they do.
But
there's
maybe not always. That doesn't mean if somebody has a felony marijuana charge.
No. That's not
they're
what
talking
I mean.
Trafficking and like bigger stuff.
Usually.
So do your homework. We're not your lawyers.
Very seldom would you have an extradition on anything speech related. There have been a lot of cases of revolutionaries, people who committed violence in relation to politics, which is about as extreme as protest can get.
Yeah.
That came here, and Mexico said, it's political, they can stay, we're not getting involved in your politics.
Then they wouldn't extradite. Now, we encourage no
one
to
to
commit violence in the name of politics or anything else. And we're not, really what we're talking about is the fact that there is no due process in the USA. Most of the people being charged with crimes are getting no due process. And I would say most of them didn't even commit a crime or the crime they're being charged with. And so it's a very legitimate thing for people to start looking at their options. The US justice system should be considered third world. And I'm looking forward to the day when countries like Mexico and elsewhere recognize that even someone charged with a serious crime in the US justice system is so third world and unjust that basically everyone that's being taken to trial is persecution. I mean, the government is basically a criminal state.
I just saw somebody flash a question about this very relevant. What about homeschooling in Mexico? Homeschooling in Mexico is not only legal, it's extremely common. It's also very informal. That is, most people just do it. It's not like they don't go there may technically be a letter you're supposed to have or something, but nobody has it.
Right.
If you want to homeschool your kids, you homeschool your kids. And the thing here is the police, CPS, well, they only kind of have CPS, but they can't just come into your house. And they can't just call a judge up and say, here, sign this warrant. It's hard to get a warrant to enter someone's house here.
Right. And in response to somebody else's question, no, I can't represent you on video chat. In U.S. courts, you don't get the representation of your choice. You have to have a representation of the private club.
Interesting.
Which is another interesting thing about Mexico. There is no mandatory bar association, and if your friend wants to represent you in court, they can. Is that in the Constitution or elsewhere? I forget where that's at.
No, it's in legal codes.
Yeah, it's in the legal code. So other good things. But talking about homeschooling, all this stuff, and this is a theme that we've made all the way across, and I want to bring that all together here. People say, well, is this legal? Can I do that? And this is why I encourage you guys. It's cheap down here. Like, just take a vacation this summer and come down. Like, try not. I've gone through this myself. Okay, try not to have to leave your country as a refugee from tyranny. It's a better situation if you leave it on your terms. And so come down here and see for yourself and see what it's like and see the different cities and the fact that most of the violence propaganda is just that. Are there bad places in Mexico that are more violent? Sure. But it's not hard to not live in those places if you don't want to, just like you probably wouldn't want to live in Detroit.
It's actually really simple.
Chicago.
I mean, this is a little too broad, but avoid Guerrero, avoid Tamaulipas, and avoid, Coahuila. I don't mean don't drive through them, don't live there. Other than that, you're good.
But you know what? And there may be a reason to live there. I don't want to be like too propaganda.
I'm not saying never
It's
live there. I'm saying that, like I said, that's broad. If
Right.
you avoid those 31 states in Mexico, if you avoid those 3, you're pretty much good.
Those are just the states where a lot of the U.S. propagated drug war violence is going on.
Exactly.
But we've been in Tamaulipas.
Yeah, it's not like you
we
can't
walked
be
the
there.
streets there with our family. Did it seem a little more? What's the word?
It was a little more hostile.
more hostile maybe than some of the other states. Yeah, but generally, I mean,
It was
we've
still
been to like 10
less hostile.
states.
It was still less hostile than most major U.S. cities, honestly.
Or most small U.S. cities,
Well,
in terms of
yeah.
the government. So.
But that is one interesting thing here. There's very little. You ain't from around here, are you?
Yeah, they don't have this like fundamental disrespect. Generally, if there's somebody that's different or new or not like them, their initial reaction, is like, oh, let's see what they have to say, right? Whereas in the USA, we're taught because of our districts and our fake laws and our fake freedom to be like, oh, you're different than us. You probably shouldn't be in our country. You're probably a terrorist, right? So
somebody says it's safe for children. That's another relevant thing.
yes.
It's safer for children than it's safe for everyone. It's extremely safe for children. You don't hurt people's kids here.
You got to realize
You
the
can have
cultural thing is like
The whole town, if you hurt somebody's kid on purpose.
yeah, that's not cool.
That would,
You got to understand that even
you might go looking for the police to turn yourself in. Not that I approve of vigilante justice, but
Yeah.
it happens. And rape and hurting kids on purpose, you don't do here.
rape and kidnapping in Mexico, even including the states that have more problems.
Yes.
Like national averages are about half of what they are in the U.S. Really, the only thing that's higher here because of the drug war and that they use heavily in the propaganda is the murder rate.
Unless you include infanticide.
But it's well, okay. If you're including murdering babies, which is popular in the U.S. and not in Mexico, the murder rate is actually vastly higher in the USA. Okay. And I absolutely do include that. Some people think that doesn't count, but I think from cradle to grave, from conception to grave, everyone's life counts. So, but on all these topics, people are like, can I do this? Can I do that? You kind of have to understand that Mexico's not this completely fascist police state like the US is. And it's not, this mindset of the people is not like, can I do this? It's like, I'm going to do this because I want to, and as long as I'm not hurting someone else and nobody bugs me, then I'm probably fine. Well, it's not like you're always getting permits and permission for
There's
things.
a really good example that happened to me. I didn't know this, but in Mexico, you're not supposed to you're not supposed to yield and turn left on a round green light. You're supposed to wait for the arrow. I didn't know that. So I turned on a round green light, and I got stopped. And I don't speak Spanish when the police stop me, because a lot of times they're not. You know how traffic stops, I don't need to go into it, but it's the same in both countries, but way less violent here, but they're still shady. So I won't speak Spanish to him, so he went around for a while, and I finally was like, I was dropping off my laundry, and I was like, look, I'm gonna go drop off my laundry. You get a translator here, I'm doing hand signals and everything so he can understand me. And he's like, yeah, go drop off your laundry. So I gotta drop off my laundry and come back 5 minutes later. And when you have a traffic stop, you get out of your car and you look the cop in the eyes. It's a completely different atmosphere. Try getting out of your car in the States. I mean, don't, because you might get shot, but...
Yeah, but it's totally normal here. The cops aren't running around like with chips on their shoulder like psychopaths. It doesn't mean they're all good cops.
There's corruption, but it's not.
There's not corruption. But it's totally normal to see somebody pulled over and the guy hops out of his car. You'll see traffic stops on a dark road where a cop has somebody pulled over and there's like 3 guys outside of their car talking to the cop, right? And so this idea that you have to be subservient to a police officer is not the same here. The idea that you always have to worry about whether you're violating a code or a statute when it doesn't hurt anybody.
Well, the Mexican people's idea about the government is not their heroes. They're not to be trusted unless they prove otherwise.
Yeah, it's kind of this necessary evil thing, which government usually is in reality, and usually it's more evil than necessary. But in the USA, it's wholly that. So I just want to encourage you guys, whatever you're dealing with. We get a lot of messages, and we have to be careful, like, what we say to people and all this stuff, right? I don't know your situation, but if you can, come down here and visit. If you want to consider getting out before it's too late, look at your options, your retirement, your business opportunities. I see the economy in Mexico is having so much potential, even as the U.S. economy is going to crash because it's unsustainable. Our national debt is higher than our GDP, whereas in Mexico, the national debt is going down. You can come down here. It takes 5 years if you want citizenship, I believe.
Yes, unless you have citizenship in another Spanish-speaking country, then it takes 2. And a lot of you may. If you have one Mexican parent, or in many cases even one Mexican grandparent, and this is true with most Latin American countries and Spain, you're a citizen. You just got to claim it.
Right.
So a lot of people that qualify for that.
Right. There's a lot of people in the U.S. that a lot of you watching this right now could probably literally just walk in and like none of this process would be a big deal. You just fill out the paperwork and you'd be a citizen.
Because what you do is you just get a Mexican passport while you left the U.S.
So in the retirees, a lot of times, right, they can just retire. Another option, I don't think I'll get in trouble for saying this because it's not frowned on here. It's not against the law. If you're like a young family, if you come here and you have a baby in Mexico, cha-ching!
Permanent resident.
Yeah, I mean, now you still, so the baby would be a citizen, not a native.
The baby is, they call it nationality because citizenship, you can't vote till you're 18, so they draw a difference. But yes, he's a citizen.
But yeah, and it's not like in the States we have this negative term called anchor babies, and everybody's like, oh, nobody should be allowed to do that. And it's like, why not? This idea that someone shouldn't be able to allowed to come and live and stay in a country is completely contrary to the Constitution, to natural law, and to common sense. Okay, so bottom line is, near as I can tell, it's not an offensive thing to say, yeah, we came down to Mexico and we had a baby and now we're permanent residents. Like, and does that pretty much bypass any financial requirements? And
yeah, sort of. They can still kind of ask for stuff, but the problem is the Mexican immigration law, the Mexican refugee law, and the Mexican Constitution, all 3 expressly forbid splitting a family, and all 3 forbid any form of seizing birthright nationality, which your baby would have. Right. So pretty much you're in.
And it's not like this is like a shady thing where you're going to get in trouble for having a baby here. I mean, again, everything's so much more laid back.
I mean, I've heard of cases where an immigration officer griped about it, and the Mexican behind the person in line was like, "What's wrong with you?"
Meaning they were coming in like for the weekend to have a baby?
No, they had a baby here and they were leaving. The immigration officer was like, "You can't do that." And the person behind them in line was a Mexican. And they were like, "Yes, they can." When we came in, there was this American lady, I should say, lady from the United States.
Estadounidense.
See. And she didn't speak any Spanish, and the immigration guard didn't speak any English, and there was a confusion about her papers. And she was like yelling at this guy, full bore. And I'm like, I was still in US mode, and I was a little bit terrified.
They're gonna shoot this
person.
Yeah,
but the guard is like, just calm down, senor, it's okay. Está bien, it's okay.
And then we meet people that visited the United States and they're just like, they're treated like absolute crap, right? It's just, the difference really is night and day, guys. We're not here to put rose-colored glasses on about Mexico or say it's perfect or there's no bad things happening or that all the politicians are lovely and wonderful and they'll kiss your babies and like pay your bills.
They'll kiss your babies.
They'll do that everywhere.
Do that in the
But, government and bureaucracy is still the same, but it's not acceptable here to just outright abuse people right on the side of the road, on the street. The immigration laws are not even close. The abuse. So all these people say to me all the time, like, you're such a hypocrite. Mexico's immigration regulations are way worse than the States. These are people that history for them is seeing a meme on their Patriot page, okay? These are people that never bothered to study the Constitution or what our founding fathers said or don't even grasp and can't rationalize with the fact that all our immigration restrictions in the USA and our abuses are illegal, that they're a violation of due process. These are people who truly do get their history from internet memes. And I just want to encourage you guys, don't get your history from internet memes, all right? Maybe even double check them before you share them. Because there's no wall in Mexico, it's not a felony to be undocumented, and no, they won't put you in a dirty Mexican prison for 10 years simply for questioning a cop.
Did you tell me Mexican
I've
prisons?
Done it numerous times. I didn't because I was focusing on the immigration.
Okay, that's fair.
And I haven't been in a Mexican prison, but frankly, they always say, Mexican prison
we know
are the
people
worst.
that have.
And actually, it sounds to me like you're actually more respected. I don't think the conditions are great in a Mexican prison, but in terms of your family coming and visit, I mean, don't they have a day when your family can just come have a barbecue with you at the prison?
The strictest ones have a day. Most of your family can live there.
They can live there at the prison with you. So it's like the goal in Mexico, unlike the US, is not to destroy and divide the family. That's like number one goal of the government entities. And you see it in the family courts, you see it
in the US.
In the US, that is. You see it in the criminal courts. The goal is to destroy families, because when you destroy families, you destroy the backbone of stability in society. And when people aren't stable, they are begging at the feet of the king, locked in their districts, hating their neighbors, and doing what they're told out of fear and terror. USA, your government is the terrorists of the world. Your problem isn't immigrants. Your problem isn't Muslims. That's not the issue. The terrorists are already running your country. And we can have disagreements on our faith and our beliefs and in this and that, but if you're abusing someone, if you're arresting someone, if you're taking people to jail because they don't have papers, if you're doing all this crap, you're not a patriot. You're not following Jesus in your actions. You're not loving your neighbor. You're just a fascist socialist that wants your corrupt government to be there giving you freebies. And you have no concept of what freedom is, and it's time to open your eyes. And a great way to do that, not everyone needs to leave the country today, but I think you should all be considering your exit plans, because those checkpoints aren't going up in U.S. borders for no reason. The wall, if whatever the wall is, whether it's real or artificial, is to lock you in, not to keep bad guys out. The bad guys are already running your country. I think we've kind of, this is a long video, but I think we've covered kind of all the practical essentials.
One more small thing. We tell you to visit. Most of you are going to go, man, that sounds expensive. You can fly from most major U.S. cities from Guadalajara or Mexico City and back for $200 round trip if you shop. It's not expensive.
So you could buy a couple tickets, right? Like let's say you and your wife or your brother or whatever, right? You come down here. You could probably get down here for, if you plan your dates, for $400 or $500. Easy 500 round trip
anywhere in the U.S.
round trip,
Alaska,
and you could probably spend a couple weeks down here and have a good time with $600 in your pocket.
Oh yeah,
I mean it's not terribly expensive, and so I think it'll really help our narrative. I hope you guys will start making videos like this. People need to see that the propaganda that says the USA is better and more free is absolutely nonsense. Because even if you're not leaving, opening your eyes to that and telling your neighbors about that, and spreading that word and opposing those billions of dollars in propaganda, that's much needed. We have to get free of the propaganda if we're ever going to be free in our persons and our property and our lives. So I think we've kind of taken this a little bit from A to Z. Don't consider this like the de facto law video on Mexican immigration. It's not. We've kind of given you this overview because we've been studying the different aspects of it and how much simpler it is than in the USA, and that it's so much more laid back and less aggressive than in the USA. If you want to look into this seriously, do some homework. If you feel you need to, get an immigration attorney, although it's simple enough that I don't think you probably need to in most cases, but a lot of people that are retiring here or something like that, just go that route. So those are some options. I think we pretty much covered every aspect of getting into the country.
As far as little stuff, as far as registration and car insurance and entry regulations, just Google it. That's just readily available.
The tourist visitor stuff is pretty basic. The fundamental of it is just that 6-month visa, which you can go out and get another one. The one thing is that to get residency, I don't know if we mentioned this, to renew that 6-month visa, or if you're here maybe for 3 or 4 months and then you want to apply for residency, in most cases you have to leave the country and come back in, and it's kind of a goofy rule that was put in to try and keep bribes down, I think is what it was for, so they just weren't handing out permanent residencies. I don't know if it was effective. It seems a little weird, but you have to, in most cases, exit Mexico and then come back in. Now, like we said, a lot of people will walk out the gate and then turn around and come back and get their visa run done, get another 6-month visa. The same thing would apply if you were in Mexico and you wanted to leave and get a permanent residency or an annual residency, etc.
But all this stuff is really easily found. This kind of stuff is basics. You can do a quick Google search, and there's lots of details on this, because there's still, 2-3 million Americans, United Statesians, estadounidenses, who visit Mexico from the U.S. a year. There's a lot of people doing that.
Not everyone's terrified and believing the propaganda. Some people are actually have gotten over that and are like, wow, it's amazing down here.
My neighbor is from Spain. She lives in Madrid.
Yeah. So there's, the stuff we're dealing with in your minds is U.S. propaganda. The rest of the world does not look at Mexico the same way. This is not how it is. We're just the sheep that are fed billions of dollars in propaganda so they can keep us slaves and afraid of everyone else in the world, so we don't want to leave. For a lot of years, it worked on me. As soon as I crossed that border and realized it was completely different, I'm like, oh, we've been duped. Okay, so check out your options. One more thing on the leaving the country thing to renew your visa. If you were, let's say, not not able to go back to your country for whatever reason,
Any country
yeah,
works.
any country works. It doesn't have to be back to your home country, so you could go further south, go out, come back in.
And Mexico
Fight on your
borders
neighbors.
3 countries.
Yeah, so
U.S., Guatemala, Belize.
so that wouldn't be hard. Just remember, guys, bottom line here, no one has to walk into a gas chamber. When you flee from political persecution, kangaroo courts, and terrorist cops, you're not fleeing law and you're not fleeing justice. You're standing up for your freedom. All right, guys, peace. All right, good?
Yeah, adios.
Later. That was my brother, Nathan, by the way. Yeah, that was him. Bye.